You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. What if I told you that most sexless marriages don't begin in the bedroom, but in the mind, long before intimacy disappears? What if the real reasons have nothing to do with attraction, fatting, aging, or stress, and everything to do with silent habits, unspoken resentments, and emotional patterns no one ever teaches you to recognize? If you're watching this, chances are you felt the confusion, the distance, the quiet frustration of lying next to someone you love, wondering how closeness slowly turned into avoidance. You may have blamed yourself, or your partner, or time itself. But Stoic wisdom reminds us that problems persist not because they are unsolvable, but because they are misunderstood. In this video, we'll uncover the hidden psychological and emotional forces that quietly drain desire from a marriage, forces most couples never see until it's too late. No shallow advice, just clear insight into what actually breaks intimacy, and how awareness can restore power, dignity, and connection. Watch this video till the very end. Each layer builds on the last, and if you leave early, you'll miss the one insight that could completely change how you see your relationship and yourself. Number 1, unresolved resentment that slowly kills desire. Unresolved resentment doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't show up as rage or confrontation. It settles quietly like sediment at the bottom of the emotional body, invisible at first, then heavier with time. Desire doesn't disappear overnight, it suffocates slowly. You feel it in the absence of warmth, in the lack of curiosity, in the way touch begins to feel like obligation instead of invitation. And the most dangerous part is this: resentment convinces you it's justified. It tells you it's protecting you, when in reality it's draining your capacity to want, to open, to feel alive. Resentment is unexpressed pain that has been rehearsed internally. It's the conversation you keep replaying long after the moment has passed, the score you keep even when you tell yourself you've moved on. Stoic philosophy warned relentlessly about this inner loop. Wrote, "The mind takes the shape of what it repeatedly holds in thought. When you repeatedly hold grievance, the mind hardens, and a hardened mind cannot desire freely. Desire needs softness, it needs safety, it needs emotional openness." Resentment closes all three. What slowly kills intimacy isn't the original wound, it's the refusal to process it cleanly. When resentment stays unresolved, it becomes identity. You stop responding to the present moment and start reacting to an accumulated past. Desire fades because attraction requires presence, and resentment lives in memory. You may believe you're withholding intimacy because something feels off, but what's actually happening is self-protection masquerading as disinterest. The body listens to the mind. When the mind stays guarded, the body follows. Stoicism never taught suppression, it taught clarity. Epictetus reminded his students that it's not events that disturb us but our judgments about them. Resentment survives because judgments go unquestioned. You tell yourself a story about what something meant, and then you punish the present for a past interpretation. Over time, desire begins to associate closeness with emotional risk. And when closeness feels unsafe, withdrawal feels logical. If you want desire to return, you must first reclaim responsibility for your inner state. This doesn't mean excusing hurt. It means refusing to let it fossilize inside you. Begin with this practice. Write down, privately, the grievances that still carry emotional charge, not to relive them but to see them clearly. Then ask yourself one hard question for each. What expectation did I attach to this that was never renegotiated? Resentment thrives on silent expectations. Once you expose them, they lose power. Another Stoic discipline is emotional ownership. Seneca warned that anger and bitterness are forms of self-harm we mistake for justice. When resentment lingers, it's because some part of you believes holding onto it gives you leverage or moral high ground. But desire doesn't negotiate with pride. Desire responds to emotional freedom. Release doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over the illusion of control. There's also a physiological truth you can't ignore. Resentment activates defense, not connection. The nervous system can't crave intimacy while it's scanning for threat. Stoicism teaches alignment between reason and emotion. That alignment begins when you practice separating facts from interpretations. A simple exercise: when a resentful thought arises, label it. Say internally, this is a memory, not a current event. That distinction alone begins to loosen its grip. You're training your mind to return to now, where desire lives. You must also rebuild trust with yourself. Lingering resentment often signals self-betrayal, moments when you didn't speak, didn't set boundaries, didn't honor your own limits. The body remembers that silence. Desire fades because part of you doesn't trust that closeness won't cost you again. Repair begins with self-respect. Practice one small act daily where you honor a boundary internally. Even silent boundaries rebuild inner safety, and safety is the soil desire grows in. Another powerful Stoic exercise is voluntary reframing. Not positive thinking, accurate thinking. Ask yourself, is my current withdrawal protecting me or imprisoning me? Most resentment feels protective, but over time it becomes a cage. Stoicism teaches you to prefer freedom over familiarity, even when familiarity feels justified. Desire returns when you stop rehearsing defense and start practicing openness, slowly, deliberately, on your terms. You also need to understand this. Resentment doesn't kill desire because of what happened. It kills desire because of what you keep telling yourself about what happened. Change the narrative and the emotional response shifts. This is not denial, it's authorship. You decide whether the past remains a teacher or becomes a jailer. Take action now. Choose one resentment you're ready to loosen, not erase, but soften. Practice awareness instead of rumination, responsibility instead of blame, presence instead of memory. Desire isn't gone, it's waiting for emotional space. And the moment you clear that space, even slightly, vitality begins to return. Stoicism was never about emotional numbness. It was about emotional mastery. Master this, and intimacy no longer feels like risk. It feels like life again. Number 2, emotional disconnection disguised as routine. What quietly starves intimacy is rarely a dramatic rupture. It's the slow normalization of emotional distance dressed up as this is just how life is now. Routine becomes the mask. You tell yourself everything is fine because nothing is wrong in an obvious way. The days move efficiently. The roles are fulfilled. Conversations happen, but they skim the surface. Touch exists, but it's functional. And without realizing it, emotional presence is replaced by emotional management. This is how disconnection hides in plain sight. Not as conflict, but as calm. Not as anger, but as neutrality. And neutrality, over time, drains desire far more effectively than chaos ever could. You feel it when closeness becomes scheduled instead of spontaneous, when curiosity about each other fades and is replaced by assumption, when silence feels easier than engagement. The Stoics warned that the most dangerous habits are the ones that feel reasonable. Wrote, "Beware lest you become too accustomed to comfort." Emotional routine is a form of comfort. It removes friction, but it also removes aliveness. Desire does not thrive in emotional autopilot. It requires presence, polarity, attention. When attention is outsourced to habit, the bond slowly loses its charge. What makes this disconnection so deceptive is that it doesn't feel like withdrawal. It feels like efficiency. You're not avoiding, you're functioning. You're not distant, you're busy. You're not disengaged, you're tired. And all of that may be true, but Stoicism teaches you to distinguish between what feels justified and what is actually constructive. Epictetus reminded us that no man is free who is not master of himself. When routine runs unchecked, it masters you. It dictates how much energy you bring, how deeply you listen, how present you allow yourself to be. Emotional intimacy doesn't disappear because of one decision. It erodes because of many small non-decisions. Moments when you choose predictability over presence. Moments when you conserve energy instead of investing it. Over time, the nervous system learns that depth is no longer expected. Desire follows attention. If attention is minimized, desire doesn't protest, it simply goes quiet. This is why sexless marriages often feel confusing. Nothing happened, and yet something essential is missing. The Stoics placed immense importance on deliberate engagement with the present moment, not passive awareness but active participation. Seneca warned that most people are not short on time but careless with it. Emotional carelessness looks like going through interactions without intention. Words are exchanged, but meaning is not. Affection exists, but it lacks charge. When emotional signals flatten, the body responds accordingly. Intimacy is not a switch you flip, it's a climate you maintain. If you want to disrupt this pattern, the first habit you must adopt is intentional presence. This is not about grand gestures, it's about how you show up internally. When you speak, speak fully. When you listen, listen without preparing your next thought. When you touch, do it with awareness. The Stoics believe that excellence is found in how you do ordinary things. Routine does not kill intimacy by itself. Unconscious routine does. Here's a practical exercise. Once a day, interrupt autopilot. Choose one interaction and bring full attention to it. Slow your speech. Notice tone, rhythm, pauses. This isn't performance, it's perception. You're retraining yourself to be there. Over time, this restores emotional signal strength. The mind relearns that connection is not an obligation but an experience. Another discipline is emotional articulation. Disconnection thrives in vagueness. Stoicism does not encourage emotional suppression, it encourages emotional clarity. Put words to internal states, not dramatically, not excessively, but honestly. When emotions remain unspoken, routine fills the gap, and routine has no pulse. Advised, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Silence, when used to avoid depth, is neither right nor true. You must also examine how predictability has replaced polarity. Desire requires contrast, not conflict but differentiation. When everything becomes familiar, nothing feels chosen. Stoicism teaches voluntary difficulty, not to suffer but to stay sharp. Apply this principle emotionally. Introduce novelty in how you express interest. Change patterns deliberately, not to impress but to awaken attention. Attention is the bridge back to desire. A powerful Stoic exercise is negative visualization, not to induce fear but gratitude. Briefly imagine the absence of connection. Not dramatically, just enough to restore perspective. This sharpens appreciation and interrupts complacency. When you remember that nothing is guaranteed, presence becomes natural. Gratitude reintroduces warmth into routines that had gone cold. Most importantly, stop waiting to feel connected before you act connected. Stoicism reverses this order. Action shapes emotion, not the other way around. If you wait for desire to return on its own, routine will always win. Choose engagement first. Choose presence first. Desire follows behavior. Emotional disconnection disguised as routine is not a life sentence. It's a signal, a quiet one, but you can hear it if you slow down. Govern your attention, train your presence, interrupt autopilot. As Epictetus taught, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Do not let routine decide the depth of your life. Decide it yourself. Number 3, one partner feeling chronically unseen or unappreciated. A sexless marriage rarely begins in the bedroom. It begins much earlier in a quieter place, inside the feeling of being chronically unseen. Not ignored in a dramatic way, not abandoned outright, but overlooked in small, repeating moments until something essential inside you starts to withdraw. When appreciation fades, desire doesn't protest loudly. It goes silent. And silence, when misunderstood, hardens into distance. You don't stop wanting intimacy because you suddenly lose interest. You stop because intimacy without recognition feels empty. When effort goes unnoticed, when emotional presence feels invisible, when your inner world never quite lands, the body receives a message the mind may resist. This is not safe to offer myself fully. Over time, attraction doesn't die, it goes dormant. Stoicism understood this dynamic deeply. Warned that neglecting what is essential slowly corrupts the soul, not through pain but through dullness. Feeling unseen does the same. It dulls desire. What makes this so dangerous is that it doesn't come from cruelty, it comes from inattention, from familiarity mistaken for understanding, from assuming presence equals appreciation. But being physically there is not the same as seeing. To be seen is to have your effort registered, your energy acknowledged, your inner posture respected. When that doesn't happen, your nervous system adapts. It conserves. It closes. And intimacy, which requires openness, quietly retreats. Stoicism teaches you to take responsibility for your inner life first. Epictetus said, "People are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them." Feeling unseen becomes unbearable when it turns into a story. I don't matter. That story drains erotic energy faster than conflict ever could, because desire needs a sense of value to survive. Without it, touch feels transactional, closeness feels performative, and sex becomes obligation instead of expression. If this resonates, the first shift you must make is internal clarity. Ask yourself, not defensively, not dramatically, where have I stopped feeling recognized? Not praised, recognized. There is a difference. Recognition says, I see the effort behind the action. Without that, the psyche stops offering effort altogether. Stoicism doesn't encourage resentment, it encourages awareness. Awareness gives you choice, and choice restores power. Here's a grounding exercise. Once a day, pause and name, internally, one thing about yourself that has gone unacknowledged but matters deeply to you. Not as a complaint, as a truth. This reconnects you with your own value instead of outsourcing it. Seneca wrote that self-respect is the foundation of all dignity. When you reclaim it internally, your body softens again. Desire begins there. Another layer to this dynamic is emotional labor. When one partner carries unseen emotional weight, intimacy becomes asymmetrical. You give without being mirrored. You hold space without being held. Over time, the imbalance registers physically. The body says enough. Stoicism invites balance, not through keeping score, but through honest alignment. Ask yourself, am I expressing my inner world, or am I hoping it will be noticed without being spoken? Silence protects you short-term, but it starves intimacy long-term. Practice intentional expression. Once a week, articulate, not accuse, what helps you feel valued. Keep it simple. Stoic clarity avoids excess. You are not asking for validation, you are sharing information. This restores mutual visibility, and visibility is fuel for desire. You must also watch for the trap of conditional appreciation. When recognition only arrives after perfection, the nervous system learns that effort is unsafe. Stoicism teaches respect for effort over outcome. Begin appreciating consistency, presence, and intention, both in yourself and in your partner. This rewires how intimacy feels. It becomes collaborative instead of evaluative. There's another truth many avoid. Chronic invisibility breeds self-betrayal. You start minimizing your needs to preserve harmony, but harmony built on erasure is fragile. The Stoics believed living in accordance with your nature was essential to peace. Suppressing your need to be seen violates that principle, and violation, even subtle, shuts down desire. Here's a practical reset. For 7 days, practice micro-recognition. Acknowledge one effort, internally or externally, without embellishment. This trains your attention back to value. Attention, as Stoicism teaches, is the gateway to meaning. Where attention goes, energy follows. Understand this deeply. Sex is not just physical closeness. It's emotional permission. When you feel unseen, permission is revoked. When appreciation returns, permission slowly reopens. Not through pressure, through presence. You are not broken for withdrawing. You are responding intelligently to neglect. But you are also responsible for restoring alignment. Stoicism doesn't ask you to endure invisibility. It asks you to reclaim agency, clarity, and self-respect. Take action now. Restore your inner visibility. Practice recognition. Speak with calm precision. Train gratitude. When the soul feels seen, the body follows. And intimacy, real intimacy, returns not as obligation but as desire freely given. Number 4, power struggles, replacing intimacy. When intimacy disappears, it rarely vanishes because desire dies overnight. More often, it's crowded out, slowly, quietly, replaced by something colder and far more exhausting, power. You can feel the shift when closeness turns into negotiation, when touch becomes conditional, when affection starts carrying a price tag. Intimacy thrives on openness, but power thrives on control, and the two cannot coexist for long. One suffocates while the other expands. And if you're paying attention, you already know which one has been winning. Power struggles don't always look dramatic. They often feel subtle, almost reasonable. A need to be right, a need to be acknowledged, a need to feel superior, secure, or unchallenged. Over time, these needs begin to dominate the emotional space where intimacy once lived. You stop meeting each other as equals and start meeting as opponents, not openly but internally. And the body, being wiser than the ego, responds by withdrawing. Desire cannot flourish where vigilance is required. It needs safety, not strategy. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus warned that no man is free who is not master of himself. When control becomes the currency of connection, neither person is free. You begin guarding yourself instead of offering yourself. Intimacy requires vulnerability, but power struggles train you to armor up. You hold back emotionally, then physically, until distance feels normal. And the most dangerous part is how justified it all feels. The mind is excellent at rationalizing disconnection when pride is involved. Power struggles often begin when identity becomes entangled with dominance, when being heard matters more than understanding, when winning matters more than connecting. You may not consciously choose this path, but repetition hardens it. The nervous system learns that closeness leads to tension, not comfort. And once that association forms, desire retreats without asking permission. Wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In this case, the struggle itself becomes the relationship. Everything starts orbiting around leverage instead of love. If you want intimacy back, the first habit to rebuild is inner neutrality. Stoicism teaches you to loosen your grip on outcomes. Ask yourself, quietly but honestly, where am I trying to control instead of understand? Where am I using withdrawal, silence, or logic as leverage rather than communication? This isn't about blame. It's about reclaiming agency. Power struggles thrive on unconsciousness. Awareness weakens them immediately. Here's a practical exercise. Once a day, practice voluntary disarmament. Choose one interaction where you consciously release the need to correct, dominate, or prove a point. Not because you're wrong, but because peace is more valuable than victory. Notice what happens in your body when you do this. The Stoics believed the body was a teacher, not an obstacle. When tension softens, intimacy has room to return. Another discipline is redefining strength. Power struggles often masquerade as strength, but Stoicism flips this illusion. True strength is restraint. Seneca wrote, "The greatest power is to have power over yourself." Intimacy responds to emotional leadership, not control. When you regulate your own reactions, you create safety. And safety is the soil where desire grows again. Not instantly, not magically, but reliably. You must also confront this truth. Intimacy dies when sex becomes a bargaining chip. Desire cannot be negotiated into existence. When intimacy is used to reward or punish, it loses its organic quality. Stoicism teaches you to separate what is within your control from what is not. You cannot force desire, but you can remove the conditions that kill it. Begin by eliminating transactional thinking. Replace if, then dynamics with presence. This alone shifts the emotional temperature. There is also a quieter form of power struggle that often goes unnoticed. Emotional. The internal ledger of who gave more, who sacrificed more, who is owed more. This mental accounting corrodes intimacy because it frames connection as debt. The Stoics warned against this exact trap. Gratitude dissolves. Practice recognizing effort without converting it into obligation. Appreciation restores balance without coercion. To rewire this pattern, adopt the habit of self-auditing. At the end of each day, ask yourself one question. Did I seek connection today, or did I seek control? No judgment, just observation. Use this practice nightly, reviewing his conduct with calm honesty. Over time, this reflection sharpens awareness, and awareness changes behavior without force. You must also slow down. Power struggles thrive on speed, quick reactions, sharp words, immediate defenses. Intimacy requires pauses. Practice the Stoic pause before responding. Breathe. Create space between stimulus and response. That space is where choice lives, and choice is where intimacy begins again. Finally, understand that intimacy is not restored by chasing desire, but by removing fear. Power struggles generate fear, fear of being dismissed, overpowered, unseen. When you lead with steadiness instead of dominance, the emotional climate shifts. You become predictable in the best way, calm, grounded, safe. The Stoics believed tranquility was contagious, and so is intimacy. Take action now. Release the need to win. Regain the discipline of self-mastery. Replace control with presence, strategy with sincerity, leverage with leadership. Power may dominate for a while, but intimacy always returns where fear no longer rules. Number 5. Unspoken expectations and silent disappointments. A sexless marriage rarely begins with rejection. It begins with silence, with expectations that were never spoken out loud but were quietly assumed, with hopes that felt obvious to you, so obvious you believed they didn't need words. And when those expectations go unmet, disappointment doesn't announce itself. It settles. It lingers. It becomes a low-grade emotional weight you carry without realizing how heavy it's getting. Over time, that weight presses down on desire until intimacy feels distant, complicated, or unsafe to reach for. Unspoken expectations are dangerous because they masquerade as fairness. Your mind tells you if they really cared, they would just know. And that belief slowly turns affection into a silent test. Every unmet expectation becomes proof. Every moment of emotional distance becomes confirmation. You don't confront it because confrontation feels risky. So you store it. You swallow it. And the body, which is far more honest than the mind, responds by withdrawing desire. Stoicism understood this long before modern psychology named it. Epictetus warned that we suffer not from events, but from our judgments about them. And nothing breeds quiet suffering like expectations you never examine. Silent disappointment reshapes how you see your partner, not dramatically, subtly. You begin to interpret neutrality as neglect, absence as indifference. Over time, the emotional field becomes charged with unsaid grievances. Sex, which requires openness and vulnerability, cannot survive in an atmosphere where the mind is constantly keeping score. Desire needs safety, and safety disappears when resentment is stored instead of expressed. What makes this pattern so persistent is that it feels mature to stay quiet. You tell yourself you're being patient, understanding, easygoing, but Stoicism draws a sharp line between patience and avoidance. Wrote that clarity is kindness to yourself and to others. Silence may keep the peace temporarily, but it also prevents repair. Every unspoken expectation becomes a silent demand, and silent demands, when unmet, turn into emotional withdrawal. You might not even be aware of how many expectations you're carrying. They've blended into your identity. They sound like rules of how things should be, but Stoic practice asks you to challenge the word should relentlessly. Ask yourself, is this expectation realistic, communicated, and within another person's control? If not, it is not an expectation. It's a setup for disappointment, and repeated disappointment hardens the heart. Desire fades when the emotional environment becomes punitive rather than open, when affection feels conditional, when intimacy feels like something that must be earned by mind reading rather than invited through honesty. Seneca warned that hidden anger is more destructive than open conflict because it rots quietly. Silent disappointment works the same way. It corrodes attraction from the inside while giving the illusion of calm on the surface. To reverse this, you must reclaim responsibility for your inner world. Stoicism does not ask you to suppress desire or needs. It asks you to own them. Start with awareness. Here's a simple exercise. Sit quietly and write down every expectation you hold around intimacy, connection, and emotional presence. Don't judge them, just list them. Then, next to each one, ask a second question. Have I ever clearly expressed this without blame or pressure? Most people discover that the expectations causing the deepest resentment were never voiced at all. The next discipline is expectation detox. For 1 week, deliberately release the demand that your partner must intuit your needs. Replace expectation with choice. If something matters to you, choose to name it calmly. If it doesn't feel safe to name it yet, choose to let go of the expectation instead of turning it into resentment. Stoicism teaches that peace comes from aligning desire with reality, not forcing reality to conform to desire. Another powerful practice is reframing disappointment as information, not accusation. Disappointment doesn't mean something is wrong with you or them. It means there is a gap between expectation and reality. That gap is an invitation to communicate or adjust, not to punish silently. Reminded himself daily to be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Apply that here. Be strict about your responsibility to speak honestly. Be tolerant about the fact that others are not mind readers. Sexual desire also weakens when emotional tension goes unresolved. The body remembers what the mouth avoids. If unspoken disappointment accumulates, the nervous system stays guarded. Guarded bodies don't open easily. Stoic philosophy emphasizes harmony between mind and body. When the mind is cluttered with unsaid grievances, the body follows with withdrawal. Clearing the mind through expression restores the conditions for intimacy to return. You can also practice voluntary vulnerability. Once a day, express a need or feeling without attaching blame or expectation of immediate change. Not to demand, not to negotiate, just to be known. This practice retrains your nervous system to associate honesty with safety instead of conflict. Over time, desire often follows emotional openness naturally, without being forced. Another exercise: replace mental rehearsals with real conversations. Notice how often you replay imagined dialogues in your head, what you wish you could say, what you fear would happen if you did. Stoicism calls this wasted energy. If something is worth thinking about repeatedly, it's worth addressing once, calmly and directly. The mind finds relief when it no longer has to carry unsent messages. Finally, understand this. Intimacy does not because needs exist, but because they are hidden behind silence and expectation. Desire doesn't disappear overnight. It withdraws when it feels unsafe, unheard, or burdened by resentment. The Stoics believed that freedom begins with truth. Speak yours, adjust your expectations, release the ones that were never promised, communicate the ones that matter. Take action now, audit your silence, convert disappointment into dialogue, align expectation with reality. When the mind becomes clear, the body often follows. And when resentment dissolves, desire has space to return, not as an obligation, but as a choice. Number 6. Stress, exhaustion, and survival mode living. A sexless marriage rarely begins with a lack of desire. It begins with depletion, with a nervous system that never fully powers down, with a mind that wakes up already bracing for impact. Stress doesn't announce itself loudly, it quietly takes over your internal bandwidth. You move through days solving, fixing, enduring, managing. Your body stays alert. Your mind stays crowded. And without realizing it, you slip into survival mode. In that state, intimacy doesn't feel inviting. It feels like another demand, another task, another thing requiring energy you no longer trust yourself to have. This is not a failure of love. It's a physiological and psychological response to chronic pressure. When life becomes an endless sequence of obligations, desire is the first thing sacrificed. Desire requires safety, presence, spaciousness. But survival mode collapses time into urgency. Everything becomes about getting through. You stop inhabiting your body and start operating it. The Stoics understood this deeply, even without modern language for stress. Epictetus warned that when the mind is enslaved by external pressures, it loses its ability to choose freely. And intimacy, at its core, is a free act. It cannot be coerced by duty or sustained by guilt. It emerges when the nervous system feels regulated and the mind feels unthreatened. Exhaustion changes how you interpret touch, closeness, and connection. What once felt grounding now feels intrusive, not because something is wrong with you, but because your system is overloaded. The body prioritizes survival over pleasure every time. That's biology, not betrayal. Yet most people never address the root. They try to negotiate desire instead of restoring capacity. They talk about frequency instead of fatigue. They focus on outcomes instead of energy. And this is where resentment quietly grows, because neither side feels seen for what they are actually enduring. Stoicism teaches you to distinguish between what drains you and what restores you. Wrote, "Men seek retreats for themselves, but nowhere can a man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." But when your inner world is crowded with stress, there is no retreat. There is only tension. You carry that tension into bed, into conversations, into silence, and intimacy cannot thrive in a clenched body or a racing mind. If you want to break this cycle, you must stop treating intimacy as a separate issue. It is not separate. It is downstream from how you live, how you rest, and how you regulate yourself. Start with this exercise. Once a day, intentionally slow your breathing for 2 minutes. No goals, no performance. Just lengthen the exhale. This simple act tells your nervous system that it is safe to stand down. Safety is the foundation of desire. Without it, nothing else matters. Another practice is to reclaim transitions. Survival mode erases boundaries between roles. Work bleeds into home. Tension bleeds into rest. Stoicism emphasizes intentional pauses. Seneca warned against living as if you're constantly being chased. Build a ritual brief but consistent that marks the end of effort and the beginning of presence. Not for productivity, for recovery. This isn't indulgence, it's maintenance. A depleted system cannot offer intimacy, no matter how strong the intention. You also need to confront the lie that exhaustion is just how life is. That belief keeps you stuck. Stoicism does not teach endurance for its own sake. It teaches wise endurance, knowing when to persist and when to simplify. Audit your energy honestly. Ask yourself, What drains me daily that doesn't actually deserve that much of me? Then remove or reduce one thing, just one. Desire doesn't require a complete overhaul. It requires enough space to breathe again. Stress also fragments attention. You're physically present but mentally elsewhere. Desire needs attention the way fire needs oxygen. When attention is scattered, intimacy feels hollow. Train your attention deliberately. Choose one daily activity and do it without multitasking, fully. This is a Stoic discipline of focus. It strengthens your ability to be present, which directly restores your capacity for connection. Presence is not romantic, it's practical, and it's trainable. There's another uncomfortable truth. Survival mode makes vulnerability feel dangerous. Intimacy requires openness, but stress teaches you to armor up. You become efficient, controlled, contained. That posture keeps you functional, but it also keeps you distant. Stoicism is often misunderstood as emotional suppression. In reality, it's emotional clarity. It asks you to feel without being ruled by feeling, to open without collapsing. Practice this by naming what you feel internally without judgment. Not explaining it, not fixing it, just acknowledging it. This softens the armor without stripping your strength. Desire returns when the body trusts that it won't be overwhelmed. That trust is built through consistency, not pressure. Remove the silent expectation that intimacy must solve the marriage. That expectation adds weight to an already tired system. Instead, focus on restoring aliveness in small ways: rest, presence, simplicity. The Stoics believed that a good life is built from good moments, deliberately lived. Intimacy is one of those moments, but it cannot exist in isolation from the rest. Take responsibility not through blame but through agency. You may not control every stressor, but you do control how you respond to them. Reminded himself daily, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Use that power to create pockets of calm, to protect your energy, to step out of survival mode and back into choice. Do the work where it actually matters: your nervous system, your attention, your daily rhythms. When those shift, desire follows naturally, not forced, not negotiated, restored. Number 7. Loss of polarity due to overfamiliarity. Polarity doesn't vanish overnight. It dissolves quietly through comfort that becomes excessive, through closeness that loses contrast, through familiarity that forgets mystery. You don't notice it happening because nothing feels wrong at first. Life continues. Conversations continue. Responsibilities are handled. Yet something essential goes missing beneath the surface. Desire fades not because love dies, but because tension disappears. And tension, subtle, respectful, alive tension, is the invisible force that keeps intimacy charged. When overfamiliarity takes over, polarity collapses and intimacy slowly turns mechanical, then optional, then absent. Polarity thrives on distinction, on two individuals remaining whole, grounded, and internally directed. When that distinction erodes, attraction has nothing to push against. You begin to merge identities instead of standing side by side. Emotional boundaries soften too much. Roles blur, energy flattens. And while comfort feels safe, safety without contrast rarely fuels desire. The Stoics understood this deeply. Wrote, "Do not lose another minute arguing what a good man should be. Be one." Polarity requires this same principle. You must be anchored in yourself, not dissolved into sameness. Overfamiliarity teaches the mind that everything is predictable. Predictability breeds emotional laziness. When nothing surprises you, not because you know deeply, but because you assume completely, the nervous system stops responding. Desire does not respond to obligation or routine. It responds to presence, polarity, and self-possession. Stoicism teaches mastery of the self, not fusion with another. Epictetus warned that when you attach your identity too tightly to external things, you lose freedom. Overfamiliarity does exactly that. It replaces autonomy with emotional enmeshment, and attraction suffocates under that weight. You restore polarity by reclaiming inner distance without emotional withdrawal. Distance is not absence, it's self-containment. It's the discipline of having your own rhythm, your own inner life, your own direction. Seneca reminded us that the greatest remedy for anger is delay. That same delay space between impulse and response revives polarity. When you stop over-explaining, oversharing, overreacting, you regain composure. Composure is magnetic, not because it performs, but because it stands. Here's a practical exercise. Practice deliberate non-reactivity. Not silence, not coldness, but restraint. When every thought is shared immediately, nothing carries weight. When emotions spill without containment, polarity collapses. Choose to pause. Choose to respond rather than react. This isn't suppression, it's sovereignty. And sovereignty is attractive because it signals inner order. Another exercise is to rebuild individuality through voluntary separation of roles. Not physically, but psychologically. Stop managing, fixing, or monitoring emotional states that are not yours to carry. Stoicism teaches responsibility without control. You are responsible for your character, not for regulating someone else's inner world. When you release this burden, polarity returns. You become centered rather than entangled. Attraction grows in the presence of someone who stands firm in their own axis. Overfamiliarity also dulls polarity through constant accessibility. When you are always available emotionally, mentally, energetically, your presence loses contrast. Stoics valued temperance for this reason. Wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Apply this to availability. Just because you can engage doesn't mean you should. Choose when to lean in and when to remain grounded in yourself. This selective engagement restores value to your presence. You must also detach intimacy from obligation. When intimacy becomes scheduled, expected, or negotiated emotionally, desire retreats. Stoicism teaches acting from principle, not compulsion. Begin practicing voluntary desire rather than duty-based closeness. That means removing pressure, removing outcome fixation, returning intimacy to choice rather than performance. Desire grows where freedom exists. Another powerful practice is reclaiming silence. Silence is not distance, it's depth. When conversation becomes constant noise, polarity disappears. Stoics believed silence sharpened perception. Use silence to let energy recalibrate. Let presence speak without words. Let mystery re-enter. Mystery isn't secrecy, it's restraint. And restraint revives attraction. You should also examine how predictability has replaced presence. Predictability feels efficient but kills polarity. Presence requires attention, intention, and grounded awareness. Practice doing fewer things with more focus. Speak less but with clarity. Move with intention. Stoicism emphasizes quality of action over quantity of motion. This embodied discipline changes how energy is felt, not just understood. Polarity also requires emotional courage, the courage to tolerate uncertainty. Overfamiliarity removes uncertainty entirely. Stoics trained themselves to sit calmly with discomfort rather than eliminate it. Do the same. Allow space. Allow silence. Allow moments where nothing is resolved immediately. Desire lives in unresolved energy, not in constant reassurance. Take action now. Audit where you've merged instead of stood, where you've overgiven instead of remained centered, where comfort replaced presence. Begin rebuilding polarity by governing your reactions, reclaiming your inner life, and restoring voluntary engagement. This is not about dominance or withdrawal. It's about balance, about standing rooted in yourself while remaining connected. As reminded himself daily, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Shift your thoughts from sameness to self-mastery, from fusion to grounded connection, from obligation to choice. Polarity will not return through effort alone. It returns through discipline, restraint, and inner order. And when it does, intimacy no longer needs to be forced. It reawakens naturally, quietly, and powerfully. Number 8. Fear of rejection, leading to avoidance. Fear of rejection doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't say, "I'm afraid." It says, "Maybe later." It says, "I'm tired." It says, "This isn't the right moment." Over time, those small internal hesitations turn into a pattern of avoidance so smooth you barely notice it happening. You don't stop wanting closeness. You stop risking it. And that distinction matters more than you think. Because desire doesn't die first in a sexless marriage, courage does. At the beginning, reaching out feels natural, but somewhere along the way, the mind starts recording outcomes. A pause, a neutral response, a lack of enthusiasm, nothing dramatic, just enough uncertainty to make your nervous system cautious. And the mind, designed to protect you from pain, quietly decides that vulnerability is too expensive. So it begins to negotiate with itself. Why initiate if the answer might be no? Why open yourself if there's a chance you'll feel unwanted? Avoidance starts to feel like wisdom, like self-respect, like emotional maturity, but it's not. It's fear wearing a rational mask. The Stoics understood this pattern well. Epictetus warned that we suffer not from events but from our judgments about them. Rejection itself isn't the wound. The meaning you assign to it is. When a possible refusal becomes proof of inadequacy in your mind, every attempt feels like a referendum on your worth. So you withdraw, not because you don't care, but because you care too much about protecting your ego. And slowly, intimacy turns into a battlefield you avoid rather than a space you enter. Here's the trap. Avoidance gives you temporary relief but long-term distance. Each time you don't initiate, the fear gets rewarded. The nervous system learns, staying quiet keeps me safe. But safety without connection becomes loneliness inside a relationship. And that loneliness doesn't stay neutral. It mutates into resentment, numbness, or silent comparison. You begin to tell yourself stories to justify the distance. Stories that feel logical. Stories that feel true. But Stoicism teaches you to challenge comforting illusions. Wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." Avoidance feels like peace, but it's actually surrender. What makes fear of rejection especially destructive is that it's self-reinforcing. The less you initiate, the more foreign intimacy feels. The more foreign it feels, the higher the emotional risk becomes. Eventually, even the idea of closeness triggers anxiety rather than anticipation. This is not because desire vanished, but because courage atrophied. Like any unused muscle, it weakens quietly. If you want to break this cycle, you must stop waiting to feel confident before acting. Stoicism flips that logic. You act first. Confidence follows. Seneca reminded us that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Your task is not to eliminate the possibility of rejection, but to eliminate the story that rejection defines you. Begin with this exercise. Detach outcome from identity. Before any attempt at closeness, say internally, "The result does not measure my worth." Repeat it until it feels boring. That's when it starts working. Another discipline is to practice voluntary exposure to discomfort. Stoics didn't avoid discomfort, they trained with it. Not dramatically, gradually. Choose small acts of emotional initiative without attachment to outcome. Not to force desire, but to rebuild your tolerance for vulnerability. You are not responsible for the response. You are responsible for the courage to show up. That distinction is everything. You must also confront the illusion of mind reading. Fear thrives on assumptions. You assume rejection before it happens. You assume disinterest without confirmation. You assume risk without evidence. Epictetus was blunt about this. Do not let the force of impression carry you away. Impressions are not facts. When you treat imagined rejection as certainty, you punish yourself for events that haven't occurred. Interrupt that pattern. Replace assumptions with presence. Return to what is actually happening, not what your fear predicts. There is also a deeper layer. Fear of rejection often masks fear of desire itself. Desire exposes longing. Longing exposes dependency. And dependency feels dangerous to a modern ego trained to value independence over connection. But Stoicism never taught emotional isolation. It taught emotional self-governance. You can desire without desperation. You can initiate without attachment. You can risk closeness without losing dignity. That balance is learned, not inherited. Practice this mental reframing. Initiation is an expression of strength, not neediness. Avoidance is not self-control, it is fear unmanaged. Each time you choose action over withdrawal, you reclaim authority over your inner world. Said, the impediment to action advances action. The very fear you feel is the training ground. Not something to escape, but something to walk through. Finally, understand this. Intimacy does not disappear because people stop wanting each other. It disappears because they stop risking themselves. Fear of rejection teaches you to play small inside your own life. Stoicism asks more of you. It asks you to act in accordance with values, not emotions. Courage, honesty, presence. Take action today, not perfectly, not dramatically, just deliberately. Break the silence your fear has been rehearsing. Rebuild tolerance for vulnerability. Detach your worth from outcomes. Because a sexless marriage is rarely about desire lost, it's about courage postponed for too long. And courage, once practiced, returns faster than you think. Number 9, using sex as leverage or control. Sex doesn't disappear in a marriage all at once. It thins out. It hesitates. It becomes conditional. And before you realize what's happening, intimacy is no longer a shared language, it's a bargaining chip. When sex turns into leverage, the marriage quietly shifts from connection to control, not through cruelty, through silence, through delay, through the unspoken message that closeness must now be earned, negotiated, or you feel it when desire is no longer freely offered but strategically rationed. And that shift changes everything, even if no one ever names it out loud. Control rarely announces itself. It disguises itself as mood, timing, fatigue, or emotional distance. And because it's subtle, it's easy to rationalize. But Stoicism teaches you to look past appearances and examine function. Ask yourself what the behavior does, not how it's explained. When intimacy becomes a reward or a punishment, sex stops being an expression of union and becomes a tool of influence. Epictetus warned that no man is free who is not master of himself. The tragedy is that when sex is used as leverage, neither person is free. One feels deprived. The other feels powerful but anxious, because control must constantly be defended. Over time, this dynamic rewires desire itself. Attraction cannot survive coercion. Wanting cannot breathe under conditions. When sex is attached to compliance, agreement, or emotional submission, it loses its vitality. It becomes transactional, mechanical, heavy, and the mind begins to associate intimacy with tension rather than pleasure. Stoicism would call this a corruption of what is natural, wrote that harmony comes from acting in accordance with nature. Desire, by nature, is voluntary. The moment it's weaponized, it starts to decay. What makes this pattern especially destructive is that it trains silence. You stop expressing longing because longing now feels unsafe. You stop initiating because rejection feels personal, strategic, or punitive. The nervous system learns to stand down. This isn't a lack of libido, it's learned restraint. And once restraint hardens into habit, sexlessness feels inevitable rather than chosen. But inevitability is often just unexamined behavior repeated long enough to feel permanent. If you want to interrupt this cycle, you must start with radical internal clarity. Stoicism demands honesty before change. Ask yourself a difficult question. Am I engaging in intimacy as a gift or as a means to an end? There is no shame in the answer, only responsibility. Control thrives in ambiguity. Awareness dissolves it. Seneca reminded us that to be everywhere is to be nowhere, and the same applies to motives. When desire is scattered across power, validation, and negotiation, it loses its center. Bring it back to choice. One powerful exercise is reclaiming non-reactivity. When sex is used as leverage, the instinct is to pursue harder, negotiate more, or emotionally bargain. Stoicism teaches the opposite. Withdraw the chase without withdrawing your presence. Maintain calm. Maintain dignity. Refuse to trade your self-respect for access to intimacy. This is not punishment, it's boundary. And boundaries reset dynamics because they remove the reward structure that control depends on. Another discipline is separating intimacy from outcome in your own mind. When desire becomes conditional, frustration follows expectation. Practice releasing entitlement, not passivity, clarity. Desire freely offered is powerful. Desire demanded is fragile. Wrote, you can commit injustice by doing nothing. In this context, doing nothing means allowing a distorted dynamic to continue unchallenged inside your own posture. Shift from expectation to self-governance. The emotional tone will change before the physical one does. You should also practice nomming, not accusing, but nomming internally. Power loses strength when it's clearly identified. Say it to yourself. Intimacy is being used as leverage, not as a story, as a fact. This mental labeling creates distance between you and the emotional pull to comply. The Stoics believed that clarity of perception is the first act of freedom. Once you see the mechanism, you're no longer trapped inside it. There is also a deeper truth here that Stoicism makes impossible to ignore. Desire cannot be coerced into existence, but it can be invited back through safety. Control creates tension. Safety creates openness. Safety is built through consistency, emotional steadiness, and refusal to escalate conflict. This doesn't mean tolerating manipulation. It means refusing to mirror it. When you become unshakable, the incentive to control diminishes because there is nothing left to grip. A practical daily exercise is this: practice voluntary emotional independence. Each day, remind yourself that your worth, calm, and identity are not negotiated through intimacy. Write it down if needed. Rehearse it. The Stoics rehearsed adversity mentally so they wouldn't be ruled by it emotionally. When you no longer need sex to validate yourself, the dynamic shifts. Desire begins to return when pressure leaves the room. Another practice is restoring polarity through self-command. Sexual energy responds to grounded presence, not emotional volatility. Govern your reactions, govern your tone, govern your inner dialogue. Seneca said, "He who conquers himself is the mightiest warrior." In a sexless marriage driven by control, self-mastery is not avoidance, it's leverage of a different kind. The kind that doesn't demand but attracts. Understand this clearly. Using sex as leverage doesn't come from strength. It comes from fear, fear of abandonment, fear of losing influence, fear of vulnerability. But fear cannot build intimacy. It can only restrict it. When you stop participating in fear-driven exchanges, you introduce a new energy into the marriage. One of calm certainty, of emotional adulthood, and that alone can disrupt patterns that felt frozen. Take action now. Stop negotiating desire. Start governing yourself. Withdraw emotional bargaining. Restore dignity. Practice non-reactivity. Reclaim choice. Sex returns not when it's demanded, but when it's safe again to be freely given. And that safety begins with you choosing self-mastery over submission. Number 10. Personal identity erosion within the marriage. Personal identity erosion doesn't announce itself with alarms. It seeps in quietly, disguised as compromise, comfort, and responsibility. At first, you tell yourself you're being mature, flexible, reasonable. You soften edges. You postpone personal interests. You silence parts of yourself that feel inconvenient. None of it feels dangerous in the moment, but over time, something subtle shifts. You stop inhabiting your own inner life fully, and when identity fades, desire follows. Not because attraction is cruel, but because it depends on vitality, distinction, and presence. When those disappear, intimacy loses its pulse. A sexless marriage often isn't about a lack of love, it's about a lack of self. When you no longer feel like a whole person, when your inner world shrinks to roles, routines, and expectations, your energy changes. You become predictable to yourself, flat, emotionally muted. And desire, whether you admit it or not, responds to polarity and aliveness. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus warned, if you are not master of your passions, you are not free. But mastery doesn't mean suppression. It means knowing who you are and refusing to abandon that knowledge for approval or peacekeeping. You may notice that over time, your thoughts revolve less around what inspires you and more around what's required of you. Obligation replaces intention. Duty replaces direction. This isn't inherently wrong, but when it becomes total, it hollows you out. You begin to relate from function rather than identity, and intimacy cannot thrive in function alone. Sex is not sustained by logistics or fairness. It's sustained by presence. By the feeling that two distinct individuals are choosing each other, not dissolving into each other. Stoicism teaches that you must never outsource your sense of self. Wrote, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. When your thoughts no longer include your own values, ambitions, and inner standards, your emotional life dims. You stop feeling chosen because you no longer feel choosing. And without choice, desire suffocates, not dramatically, gradually. What makes identity erosion especially dangerous is that it feels virtuous. You tell yourself you're being selfless, that you're prioritizing harmony. But harmony built on self-erasure is unstable. The Stoics never advocated self-denial for its own sake. They advocated alignment, living in accordance with your nature. When you betray that nature repeatedly, when you override your instincts, mute your voice, or abandon your inner compass, you lose coherence. And incoherence is deeply unattractive, even if it's never named. To reverse this, you must begin by reclaiming internal authority. Ask yourself quietly, honestly, where you stopped choosing and started complying, where you began performing instead of expressing. This isn't about blame, it's about awareness. Seneca wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom here means psychological sovereignty, the ability to stand inside your own identity without apology, without explanation. Start with a simple exercise. Once a day, engage in an activity that reinforces your individuality, not productivity, not obligation, identity. Something that reminds you that you exist beyond roles. Do it deliberately. Protect it. This is not indulgence, it's maintenance. You are restoring the inner voltage that makes connection electric rather than mechanical. Another practice is to audit your inner dialogue. Notice how often you minimize your desires before they're even spoken, how often you pre-compromise internally. This habit trains you to disappear. Replace it with neutral acknowledgement. You don't need to act on every desire, but you must recognize it. Recognition is respect, and respect, directed inward, changes how you show up outwardly. Stoicism also emphasizes boundaries, not as walls but as definitions. When boundaries dissolve, identity blurs. Begin defining what matters to you again. Your standards, your rhythms, your non-negotiables, not aggressively, calmly. Clarity is attractive because it signals self-trust, and self-trust reawakens desire, not just in others but in yourself. There is also the discipline of solitude. Not isolation, but intentional separation from constant relational feedback. The Stoics valued solitude as a way to realign with reason and self-knowledge. Spend time alone without distraction. Let your thoughts surface. Let forgotten parts of you speak. This isn't withdrawal, it's When you return from this inner alignment, your presence changes. You are no longer seeking validation, you are offering energy. Finally, understand this. Desire doesn't revive through negotiation. It revives through transformation. When you reclaim your identity, intimacy follows naturally. Not because you demand it, but because you become someone who evokes it. Reminded himself daily that he was responsible for his inner state, regardless of circumstance. That same responsibility applies here. Take action now. Reclaim your inner life. Restore your individuality. Govern your mind before it dissolves into routine. Because a sexless marriage is often a mirror, not of broken love, but of a forgotten self. And the moment you remember who you are, everything begins to shift. If this video stirred something uncomfortable inside you, that's a good sign. It means you're no longer hiding from the truth. A sexless marriage is rarely about desire disappearing overnight. It's about silence, resentment, emotional withdrawal, unspoken power struggles, and years of unmet needs quietly piling up. And the most dangerous part, most people don't notice it happening until intimacy feels foreign. But awareness changes everything. You now see what many couples never dare to confront. And that means you still have leverage over your actions, your boundaries, your emotional presence, and the direction this relationship takes from here. Whether that path leads to rebuilding connection or reclaiming yourself, the worst mistake is continuing on autopilot. If this video helped you connect dots you've been ignoring, don't let the insight fade. Rewatch it. Reflect on where you've been passive, resentful, or disconnected. And if you want more videos that break down relationships with clarity, psychology, and hard truth, subscribe to the channel. Because intimacy doesn't die by accident. And neither does respect.